Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're climbing up to the cold, unforgiving heights to dissect a truly remarkable piece of philosophical literature, the sovereign flame. For way too long, conventional interpretations of this myth have frankly fed us this weak, nauseating imagery of the weeping damsel, right? You know the one, trapped on a rock, desperately waiting for some savior to brave the flames. But today, we're exploring a totally different lens, a sharper, colder, and honestly, far more liberating perspective. We're going to use the source material to strip away the romantic delusions of the herd mentality. We're looking at this narrative as it truly is, a grim, dark, gothic fable of ultimate self-liberation and Nietzschean philosophy. Consider this biting aphorism from 1882 to set the tone for our journey. Let us look away from those tragic actresses of redemption who throw themselves into the flames out of a lack of options. I mean, that perfectly captures our starting point, doesn't it? The text is essentially demanding that we stop viewing her like those overly sentimental poets did, painting a tragic heroine weeping for a hero. We need a lens of true philosophical power here. The source material literally scoffs at anyone who misunderstands her isolation on that mountain. To actually grasp her profound transformation, we've got to define the philosophical lens the author is using here, and that is the concept of their freie Geist, the free spirit. This is what shifts her from a pathetic, tragic figure into this incredible, independent, sovereign archetype. So, what is a free spirit? Well, it's someone who has learned the hard, golden laughter of the heights, someone who has completely transcended all the petty, exhausting dramas of the valley down below. They've discarded the rotting traditions of the past, and they actively choose to walk away from gods and men alike. She isn't a victim. She is the absolute architect of her own solitude. Act 1. The Sanctuary of the Stone. Now, what's really interesting here is how it initiates the first phase of her inverted hero's journey. She's fleeing the dying breath of Valhalla, which is basically this rotting pantheon of decaying gods and obsolete laws, and she ascends to the peak. Now, to the ordinary valley dwellers, the herd, she's just a trapped prisoner, right? Cursed to sit around and wait for a savior. But the truth of the free spirit is vastly different. She claims that burning home not because she's locked up, but because she simply wishes to roam no more among the weak. Those flames, they serve as a boundary, a self-chosen wall of solitude against the herd mentality. She is actively choosing this isolation and fire over the living death of conforming to Wotan's dying world. So we have to ask ourselves a frankly ridiculous question. Did she light that fire just to find a husband? Look, the source text finds that very idea completely insulting to the intellect of a sovereign being. It utterly rejects those conventional, nauseating ideas of romantic destiny. That fire is definitely not a beacon for a suitor. It's a profound, grueling test. Act 2. The Test of the Mortal Gaze. In this phase, we analyze the arrival of the supposed hero, who finally crosses the flames. Remember, the fire wasn't kindled to find a savior's hand. It was a crucible. It was meant to see who among the mortals could actually endure her piercing gaze. And when this hero finally arrives, well, he isn't some pure beacon of hope. He's altered. He's all tangled up in the petty lies of the mortals. He's been completely corrupted by the valley's deception, sickened by the herd. And ultimately, he fails to endure the intensity of her burning rock. He proves himself to be just another mortal, completely unworthy of the heights.
So, do you think she wept at this failure? Well, maybe. Perhaps for a fleeting mortal moment. But a free spirit doesn't just sit around dwelling in the ashes of disappointment. Instead, she looks right past that grief, beneath what the text calls a great noon sky, her Sanctus Januarius. This represents the absolute zenith of clarity. It's that moment of supreme self-realization where all the shadows of illusion just vanish and the dawn of her true, undeniable independence arrives.
Act 3. The Sovereign Immolation. Okay. Let's dive into this, because this brings us to the darkest, yet easily the most liberating part of the fable. It completely reframes her climax. The traditional interpretation leans heavily on romantic self-sacrifice, right? This whole idea that she leaps into the fire to redeem the world through some pitiful dying love. Well, the philosophical text vehemently rejects that. Instead, we see sovereign immolation. The fire is a tool for self-cleansing. She isn't looking for redemption from the heavens above. She's using those flames to violently burn away her divine conditioning, her past dependencies, and literally every lingering mortal trace. To truly understand this cleansing, we've got to embrace a core Nietzschean concept, amor fati, the love of one's fate. Now, this isn't just passively accepting what happens to you. No way. It is actively loving the destructive element that consumes your old values.
By stepping into her own fire, she embraces the spark to banish the dark. She is taking absolute, unflinching mastery over her own destiny. She looks at her burning rock and realizes a fundamental truth here. The fire belongs to her. It is not a punishment handed down by Votan. It is no longer governed by a father's fading laws. She claims that destructive element entirely as her own property, severing the absolute final thread of her dependency on those decaying gods.
Act 4, The Wanderer of the Heights. Let's move to and see how this builds, because we now observe her glorious ascension from the ashes. Looking across her subverted psychological journey, the evolution is incredibly clear. First, she claimed the fire as her own. Then, she tested the world and realized it simply could not endure her gaze. She experienced the crystal clarity of the great noon. And now, she prepares for the final flight. She doesn't leap into the ash to die. Actually, scratch that. She steps entirely through the smoke to leave the ruins of the old world far, far behind her. Her spear is now a walking stick. Wow, what a profound, poetic image that is. The weapon of war, this tool of a dying god's wrath, is broken and completely repurposed for a solitary journey. She has completely abandoned the wars of men and gods alike. She's seeking only the lonely, quiet, freezing ridges of the mountains, the paths that only a true free spirit can walk. I mean, just look at her now as she wanders those ridges, entirely independent, thoroughly content to be her own danger and her own light. She has shifted completely from a dependent, tragic figure into an absolutely awe-inspiring master of reality. She doesn't need a savior to protect her from danger because she is the danger. She requires no god to guide her, for she is the light. I'm going to leave you with this final, piercing question to stare into. If the fire consumed your dependencies today, your reliance on the herd, your desperate need for external saviors, the dying laws you stubbornly cling to, could you endure the golden laughter of the heights, or would you just weep in the ashes, begging for the valley once more? It's a heavy question for sure, but it's one the free spirit answers with a smile. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, seek the heights.